Have you ever felt like you're living in two worlds at once? Like you can see through the illusions that keep most people trapped in an endless cycle of distraction and superficiality? What if I told you that this isn't a curse, but a calling? Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists in history, believed that only a small percentage of humanity ever experiences true psychological and spiritual awakening. He called this process individuation, the journey of becoming your most authentic self. But here's what most people don't understand. Awakening isn't about reaching some permanent state of bliss or enlightenment. It's not about floating on clouds or escaping reality. It's about seeing reality more clearly than ever before, even when that clarity is uncomfortable. Today, we're diving deep into the 7 unmistakable signs that your soul is among the rare 1% who are truly awakened. And I promise you, this isn't your typical spiritual fluff video. We're going to explore the real psychological and existential markers that Jung identified through decades of working with thousands of patients. Before we begin, if you're someone who's been feeling different, isolated, or misunderstood lately, this video might finally give you the validation you've been searching for. And if you find value in what we discussed today, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. This channel is dedicated to bringing you profound psychological insights that can genuinely transform your life. Let's begin. SIGN 1. The Dark Night of the Soul. The first sign that you're among the awakened 1% is one that might surprise you, because it's not pleasant at all. You've experienced what mystics call the dark night of the soul, and you've emerged from it transformed. Now, this isn't just about going through a difficult period. Everyone faces challenges. What makes this different is the depth and the existential nature of this crisis. Jung observed that true awakening often begins with what he called psychic death, a period where your old identity, your old beliefs, your old way of seeing the world completely collapses. It feels like drowning in an ocean of meaninglessness. Let me paint you a picture of what this actually looks like. You wake up one day and suddenly, everything that used to matter to you, your career ambitions, your social status, your possessions, your relationships, all of it feels hollow, empty, like you've been playing a character in a movie, and suddenly you've realized it's all just a script. The worst part? You can't just go back to sleep. You can't unsee what you've seen. During this phase, you might have asked yourself questions like, what's the point of any of this? Why do I feel so disconnected from everyone around me? Am I going crazy, or is everyone else living in a collective delusion? Jung himself went through this during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious between 1913 and 1917. He experienced visions, heard voices, and felt like he was losing his mind. But instead of suppressing these experiences, he dove deeper into them. He kept journals, created artwork, and dialogued with the figures that appeared in his psyche. And this is what separates the truly awakened from those who simply experience a mental health crisis. They use the breakdown as a breakthrough. If you've been through this dark night, if you've stared into the abyss of meaninglessness and somehow found the courage to keep going, to keep questioning, to keep searching for truth even when it hurts, then you've passed the first initiation. But here's what's crucial to understand. This isn't a one-time event. Awakened individuals often cycle through multiple dark nights throughout their lives. Each time they outgrow a level of consciousness, there's a period of disintegration before reintegration at a higher level. The key difference is this: after your first real dark night, you're no longer afraid of the darkness. You've learned that psychological death isn't the end, it's transformation. Think about your own life for a moment. Have you experienced this kind of existential crisis? A period where everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world was called into question? If you have, and you're still here, Still searching, still growing. That's not weakness. That's one of the clearest signs of an awakened soul. Sign 2. You see through the persona. The second sign that you're among the awakened 1% is perhaps the most socially isolating. You can see through the persona. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the mask we wear in social situations. It's the carefully constructed image we present to the world, the acceptable version of ourselves that fits societal expectations. Here's what most people don't realize. We all have a persona. It's necessary for functioning in society. The problem isn't the persona itself, it's when people become their persona, completely identifying with the mask and forgetting there's a real person underneath. But you can see right through it. When someone is at a party, laughing loudly and playing the role of the life of the party, you can sense the insecurity underneath. When a colleague presents themselves as the successful professional, you can feel the desperation for validation. When someone posts their perfect life on social media, you can see the curated fiction. And here's the thing that makes this gift feel like a curse. Once you can see through personas, social interaction becomes exhausting. You're at a networking event, and while everyone else is exchanging business cards and small talk, you're having an entirely different experience. You're watching a theater performance where everyone has forgotten their acting. They've mistaken their role for their identity. This is why awakened individuals often feel lonely in crowds. It's not that they're antisocial, it's that they're surrounded by personas talking to personas while they're desperately looking for something real. Jung wrote extensively about this. He noticed that many of his most psychologically mature patients struggled with social relationships because they could no longer participate in what he called collective unconsciousness, the shared delusions and social games that most people play without questioning. But here's where it gets really interesting. If you're truly awakened, you don't just see through other people's personas. You're acutely aware of your own. You know which parts of yourself you're hiding. You know when you're performing rather than being authentic. And this self-awareness creates a fascinating paradox. You still use your persona when necessary because you have to function in society, but you're no longer unconsciously identified with it. Let me give you a concrete example. An awakened person might go to a job interview and present a professional persona, well-dressed, articulate, confident. But unlike most people, they're doing this consciously. They're aware they're playing a role for a specific social context. The moment they leave, they can drop the mask without any existential crisis about who they really are. Compare this to someone who's unconsciously identified with their professional persona. If they lose their job, they lose their sense of identity. Their entire self-worth collapses because they've mistaken the mask for the face. Now, I want to address something important here. Seeing through the persona doesn't make you better than others. This is a trap many people fall into: spiritual ego, which we'll talk about later. The truly awakened person sees through personas with compassion, not judgment. They understand that everyone is doing their best to survive psychologically in a world that often doesn't make space for authentic expression. So if you're watching this and recognizing yourself in this description, here's what I want you to consider. How can you honor both the truth you see and the social reality you live in? How can you maintain your authenticity while still being kind and effective in your interactions with others? This balance between seeing clearly and acting compassionately is one of the hallmarks of true wisdom. Sign 3. Synchronicity becomes your compass. The third sign that you're among the awakened 1% might sound mystical, but Jung considered it scientifically significant. You've begun to notice and trust synchronicity. Now, before skeptics dismiss this as woo-woo nonsense, let me explain what Jung actually meant by synchronicity, because it's far more nuanced than most people realize. Synchronicity, according to Jung, is the occurrence of meaningful coincidences that have no causal relationship but are connected through meaning. These are moments when the external world seems to mirror your internal psychological state in ways that are too specific to be random chance. Here's a simple example. You're struggling with a major life decision. You're torn between taking a safe path or following your intuition into unknown territory. That same morning, you see 3 separate references to taking the leap in a song on the radio, a billboard you pass, and a random conversation you overhear at a coffee shop. The skeptic says, confirmation bias. You're just noticing things you're already thinking about. But Jung discovered something deeper through decades of clinical observation. These synchronicities often provided information that the conscious mind didn't have access to, and following them led to psychological growth and individuation. What separates awakened individuals from others isn't that they experience more synchronicities. It's that they've learned to pay attention to them. Most people dismiss these moments. Just a coincidence, they say, and move on with their day. But the awakened soul recognizes these moments as communications from the deeper self. That capital S, self that Jung believed was the organizing principle of the entire psyche. I want to share a powerful example from Jung's own life. Jung was treating a patient who was extremely rational and closed off emotionally. She had a dream about a golden scarab beetle. During their next session, as she was telling Jung about this dream, they both heard a tapping at the window. Jung opened it, and a scarab beetle, extremely rare in that region of Switzerland, flew into the room. This synchronistic event shattered the patient's rigid rationalism and opened her up to deeper psychological work. Jung didn't interpret this as magic. He saw it as evidence that there's a dimension of reality where psyche and matter intersect in ways our current scientific paradigm can't fully explain. Now, here's what's crucial for you to understand. Awakened individuals don't become superstitious. They don't see signs in everything or use synchronicity as a way to avoid making difficult decisions. Instead, they develop what Jung called symbolic thinking, the ability to hold both rational and intuitive understanding simultaneously. They might analyze a situation logically and notice what the universe seems to be reflecting back to them. They use their intellect and their intuition. They're grounded in reality and open to mystery. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice. An awakened person is considering whether to end a long-term relationship. They're making practical lists of pros and cons, thinking rationally about the situation. But they're also noticing that everywhere they go, they keep encountering symbols of endings and new beginnings: the last leaf falling from a tree, a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis, an old bridge being demolished to build a new one. They don't take these as commands from the universe telling them what to do. Rather, they receive them as confirmations that they're in a period of natural transformation and that their intuitive sense that something needs to end is valid. See the difference? Jung believed that synchronicity becomes more frequent as you progress in your individuation journey. Why? Because as you become more aligned with your authentic self, the boundary between inner and outer reality becomes more permeable. Your psyche and your external circumstances begin to harmonize. Now I know some of you watching this are skeptical about this whole concept, and that's actually healthy. Jung himself was skeptical at first. He only accepted synchronicity after witnessing it repeatedly in his clinical practice and his own life. What I'd encourage you to do is this. For the next week, simply pay attention. Don't try to make synchronicities happen. Don't force meaning onto random events. Just notice. Notice when something in your external world seems to mirror something you've been thinking or feeling. And here's the most important part. Notice how it feels when you pay attention to these moments. Does it make your life feel more meaningful? More connected? Does it help you make decisions that align with your deepest values? Because ultimately, that's what matters. Not whether synchronicity is real in some objective sense, but whether attending to it helps you live a more authentic, aligned, and psychologically integrated life. And if the answer is yes, welcome to the 1%. SIGN 4. The burden of seeing collective shadows. The fourth sign that you're among the awakened 1% is, perhaps the heaviest burden of all, you can see the collective shadow, and it weighs on your soul. Jung's concept of the shadow is one of his most important contributions to psychology. The personal shadow consists of all the parts of ourselves that we've repressed, denied, or refused to acknowledge, usually because they don't fit with our self-image or what society deems acceptable. But Jung also identified something even more profound, the collective shadow. This is the accumulated darkness of an entire culture, society, or even all of humanity. It's the greed, violence, prejudice, and destructive patterns that we collectively refuse to acknowledge and integrate. And here's what separates the awakened from the asleep. Awakened individuals can see this collective shadow even when everyone around them is in denial. Let me give you some examples of what this looks like. You're watching the news, and everyone is divided into good guys and bad guys, pointing fingers at the other side. But you can see how both sides are projecting their own shadow onto each other. You can see how each group carries the exact darkness they're accusing the other of possessing. You're at a social gathering where everyone is talking about how important it is to be a good person, but you can feel the unacknowledged judgments, the hidden resentments, the performative virtue that masks genuine cruelty. You're scrolling through social media, and you can see how the collective is playing out the same archetypal dramas that humans have been repeating for thousands of years: the scapegoating, the tribalism, the need to have enemies to unite against. This awareness is exhausting, and it's lonely, because when you try to point out these patterns, you're often met with hostility. People don't want to look at the collective shadow. They want to maintain their comfortable narratives about who's good and who's evil, who's enlightened and who's ignorant. Jung observed this during World War II. He could see how the Nazi phenomenon wasn't just about evil individuals, it was a manifestation of the German collective shadow that had been building for decades. The hyperationalism, the suppression of emotion, the rigid social structures, all of this created a psychic pressure that eventually exploded in the most horrific way. And here's what terrified Jung. He realized that in NY culture, any group of people could fall into the same pattern if they refused to acknowledge and integrate their collective darkness. This is why awakened individuals often feel a deep sense of responsibility. They're not just working on their own psychological integration, they feel called to help bring consciousness to collective patterns. But this comes at a cost. When you can see the collective shadow, you often become the target of collective projection. Because you're willing to acknowledge darkness that others deny, people assume you must be that darkness. This is why mystics, prophets, and truth-tellers throughout history have often been persecuted. They held up a mirror to the collective, and the collective didn't like what it saw. If you're someone who can see these patterns, here's what you need to understand. First, your awareness is not paranoia. You're not overthinking or being too negative. You're simply seeing reality more clearly than most people can tolerate. Second, you don't have to carry this burden alone. Find others who can see what you see. Build community with people who are doing their own shadow work, both personal and collective. Third, and this is crucial, don't let your awareness of collective darkness turn into cynicism or despair. Jung believed that the shadow, once integrated, becomes a source of tremendous creative power. The collective shadow contains not just darkness, but also potential. It's the raw, unintegrated energy that, when consciously worked with, can fuel genuine transformation. Think about the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, environmental activism. All of these emerged from people who could see the collective shadow and had the courage to confront it. Your ability to see collective patterns isn't just a burden, it's a gift. And potentially, it's a calling. But you have to take care of yourself. You have to establish boundaries. You have to remember that you can't force consciousness on people who aren't ready. All you can do is continue your own individuation journey. Speak your truth when appropriate, and trust that consciousness spreads in mysterious ways. Jung had a beautiful phrase for this. He said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." If you're someone who's willing to look at the darkness, both in yourself and in the collective, then you're doing sacred work. And you're definitely among the awakened 1%. Sign 5. Spiritual loneliness and the search for tribe. The fifth sign that you're among the awakened 1% is something that almost everyone on this path experiences, but rarely talks about: profound spiritual loneliness. This isn't just about being alone. You can be surrounded by people, family, friends, colleagues, and still feel completely isolated because no one truly understands the internal world you're navigating. Jung called this the loneliness of the individuated person, and he was very clear. This is an inevitable part of the awakening process. Here's why this happens. When you begin the journey of awakening, you start operating from a different level of consciousness than most people around you. It's not that you're better, it's that you're asking different questions, valuing different things, and seeing reality through a different lens. You're at a family dinner, and everyone is talking about surface-level concerns: who's dating who, the latest gossip, consumer products they want to buy. And you're sitting there thinking about the nature of consciousness, the meaning of suffering, your purpose in the universe. You try to bring up deeper topics, and you're met with awkward silence or quick subject changes. People think you're being too serious or too heavy. You're in a relationship, and your partner can't understand why you need so much time alone for reflection and inner work. They interpret your need for solitude as rejection, when really, it's necessary for your psychological survival. You're at work, and everyone is focused on climbing the corporate ladder, while you're questioning the entire structure of how we organize society and whether any of this actually contributes to genuine human flourishing. This is spiritual loneliness, and it cuts deep, because humans are tribal creatures. We need connection. We need to feel seen, understood, and accepted. And when the awakening process takes you outside of conventional consciousness, you can feel like you're wandering in a desert, searching for your tribe but finding only mirages. Jung experienced this himself. Even though he was internationally famous, he wrote in his journals about feeling profoundly alone in his understanding of the psyche. Most of his colleagues thought his ideas were too mystical. His theories about archetypes, the collective unconscious, and synchronicity were dismissed by mainstream psychology for decades. But here's what Jung discovered, and what I want you to understand if you're experiencing this loneliness. The spiritual loneliness serves a purpose. It's part of the individuation process. It's stripping away your dependence on external validation and forcing you to develop a relationship with your own inner authority, what Jung called the self. Think about it. If you could find immediate understanding and acceptance in the mainstream world, would you be forced to go deeper into your own psyche? Would you develop the inner resilience and self-trust that awakening requires? Probably not. The loneliness is the pressure that turns coal into diamond. But, and this is important, Jung never said you have to remain isolated forever. As you continue your journey, something remarkable happens. You start to find your tribe. Not the tribe you were born into, but your chosen tribe, the soul family that resonates with your frequency. These connections might be rare, but when you find them, they're profound. One genuine soul-to-soul connection with someone who truly sees you is worth 100 superficial friendships. So if you're in the lonely phase right now, here's what I want you to know. First, your loneliness is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that you're outgrowing the collective consciousness, and you haven't yet found your new community. Second, use this time wisely. Develop your relationship with yourself. Journal, meditate, create, do your inner work. This solitude is a gift, even though it doesn't feel like one. Third, trust that your tribe is out there. They're on their own journey, doing their own inner work. And when you're both ready, you'll find each other. It might be through a book, a video like this one, a workshop, an online community, or a chance encounter that doesn't feel like chance at all. Jung believed in what he called spiritual kinship, soul connections that transcend family, culture, and even time. Some of his most important relationships were with people he never met in person but connected with through their writings. And finally, remember this. Part of the awakening journey is learning to be comfortable with solitude, not as a permanent state, but as something you no longer fear. The awakened individual can be alone without being lonely because they've cultivated a rich inner world. They've learned to dialogue with their own psyche, to find wisdom in their dreams, to feel connected to something larger than themselves. You're not alone in feeling alone. Paradoxical, I know. But thousands of people watching this right now know exactly what you're experiencing. Welcome to the tribe of the temporarily tribeless. SIGN 6. The death of spiritual ego. The sixth sign that you're among the awakened. 1% is perhaps the most humbling. You've experienced the death of your spiritual ego. Now, this is where things get really interesting, and where a lot of people get stuck on the spiritual path. Here's what happens to most people when they first start awakening. They have profound insights. They feel more conscious than the people around them. They see through illusions that others are trapped in. And then, the ego co-opts the entire awakening process. Suddenly, they're not just awake, they're special. They're chosen. They're part of the enlightened few. And everyone else is just asleep. Jung called this inflation, when the ego inflates itself by identifying with archetypal or spiritual content. And he considered it one of the most dangerous traps on the path of individuation. You've probably encountered this type of person. Maybe you've even been this person at some point. I know I have. They talk about how conscious they are. They judge others for being still asleep. They use spiritual concepts as weapons to feel superior. They collect spiritual experiences like trophies. I've had 3 Kundalini awakenings, have you? They speak in spiritual platitudes. Everything happens for a reason. Just raise your vibration. You create your own reality, using these phrases not as genuine wisdom, but as ways to bypass real engagement with suffering and complexity. This is spiritual bypassing. This is the ego wearing enlightenment as a costume. And here's the thing. The truly awakened person has gone through this phase and come out the other side, humbled and transformed. They've realized that awakening doesn't make you special. It makes you more human, not less. It makes you more aware of your flaws, not immune to them. It makes you more compassionate toward the struggles of others because you recognize those same struggles in yourself. Jung wrote about his own experience with spiritual inflation. In his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he describes a period where he felt he had special access to archetypal wisdom. But then he had a dream that showed him his own arrogance, and it shattered his inflated self-image. This shattering, this death of the spiritual ego is actually a sign of progress, not failure. Let me describe what this looks like. You stop needing to prove your awakening to anyone. You stop name-dropping spiritual concepts in conversations to sound enlightened. You stop judging others for where they are on their journey because you're too busy with your own work. You become less certain about everything. The more you awaken, the more you realize how little you actually know. The universe becomes more mysterious, not less. Your faith becomes quieter but deeper. You stop seeking peak experiences and start valuing ordinary moments. You find the sacred in washing dishes, in caring for a sick friend, in simply being present with whatever is. You develop a sense of humor about yourself. You can laugh at your own pretensions, your own contradictions, your own ongoing struggles. You stop taking yourself so seriously. Most importantly, you become genuinely humble. Not false humility, where you're secretly proud of how humble you are, but real humility, the recognition that you're part of something vast and mysterious. That consciousness is using you as much as you're developing consciousness, and that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Here's the beautiful paradox that Jung understood. The truly awakened person holds two truths simultaneously. On one hand, they recognize that yes, they've done the inner work. Yes, they've developed psychological maturity that's uncommon. Yes, they see things many people don't see. But on the other hand, they're acutely aware of how much work still remains. How many shadows they haven't integrated. How many times they still react unconsciously. How far they are from whatever enlightenment might mean. They hold both their development and their limitations with equal awareness. This is what Jung meant by the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in consciousness without collapsing into one side or the other. So let me ask you, where are you in this process? Are you still in the inflation phase, secretly proud of being more conscious than others? Or have you been humbled by the realization that awakening is an endless journey? And the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know? If it's the latter, if you felt your spiritual ego die, even if parts of it keep trying to resurrect themselves, then you're definitely among the awakened 1%. Because the willingness to be humbled, to be wrong, to keep questioning even your most cherished beliefs, that's the hallmark of genuine wisdom. Sign 7, living the questions. And this brings us to the 7th and final sign that you're among the awakened 1%. You've learned to live the questions, rather than desperately searching for answers. This might be the most profound shift of all. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke, whose work Jung deeply admired, wrote, "Have patience with everything unresolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves." Live the questions now. Most people can't do this. They need certainty. They need to know whether God exists, whether there's life after death, whether they're on the right path, whether everything will work out. And so they latch on to belief systems, whether religious, political, or philosophical, not because these systems are necessarily true, but because they provide the illusion of certainty in an uncertain universe. But the awakened soul? They've developed something far more valuable than certainty. They've developed the capacity to dwell in mystery. They don't need to know all the answers. They're comfortable saying, "I don't know." They can hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, without collapsing into relativism. They ask questions like, what is trying to emerge in my life right now? What is this situation teaching me? How am I being called to grow? And they live into these questions rather than demanding immediate answers. Jung's entire approach to psychology was based on this principle. He didn't offer his patients neat formulas or quick fixes. Instead, he helped them engage with their own psyche as a living mystery to be explored, not a problem to be solved. He encouraged people to dialogue with their dreams, to engage with their unconscious, to sit with their symptoms and ask, what is this trying to tell me? This is the opposite of our modern culture, which is obsessed with optimization, efficiency, and having everything figured out. The awakened person knows some questions don't have answers. Some mysteries are meant to be lived, not solved. Some experiences are meant to transform you, not be understood intellectually. As we come to the end of this video, I want you to take a moment and reflect. How many of these 7 signs resonated with you? If most or all of them did, if you've experienced the dark night, if you see through personas, if you trust synchronicity, if you carry the weight of collective shadows, if you've felt spiritual loneliness, if your spiritual ego has been humbled, and if you're learning to live the questions, then yes, you're among the awakened 1%. But remember, this isn't about being special or superior. It's about recognizing the path you're on and finding encouragement to continue. Because this journey, it's not easy. It's not always comfortable. And there will be times when you question everything, including whether awakening is even worth the cost. But Jung believed, and I believe, that the individuation journey, the awakening of consciousness, is the most important work any human being can do, not just for yourself, but for the collective. Every person who does their inner work, who integrates their shadows, who becomes more conscious, they raise the consciousness of the entire human family. You're not just working on yourself. You're participating in the evolution of human consciousness itself. Thank you so much for staying with me through this deep dive into Carl Jung's psychology of awakening. If this video resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Sometimes, the most valuable thing we can do is help someone feel less alone in their experience. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. We're building a community of people who are committed to depth, authenticity, and genuine psychological and spiritual growth. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which of these 7 signs resonated most with you? What has your awakening journey been like? Let's create a space where we can share our experiences and support each other. Remember, you're not alone. Your sensitivity is not weakness. Your questions are not problems. Your loneliness is not permanent. You're exactly where you need to be on your journey. Keep going. Keep growing. Keep awakening. Until next time, take care of yourself and that beautiful, complex soul of yours.